America's Guard of Honor, A Brief History by Robert M. Albertson, Jr. Symbols of Unity and Valor, All-American Honor. The fifth jump was supposed to be my moment of triumph. For most guys, it meant graduation, a ticket punched. For me, it ended with a leg brace, a clipboard full of amended orders, and a quiet exit from the Ranger indoctrination program before I ever made it through the gate. It wasn't the outcome I wanted, but I wasn't broken up about it either. Injuries happen. The assignment changed, but the mission didn't. I was rerouted to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, permanent duty with the 82nd Airborne Division. It wasn't a step down. If anything, it was the best chance I had to get back into the pipeline later. The 82nd had a reputation of skill development, which allowed the trooper opportunities to try out for Ranger School or the Q course and other elite teams. I wasn't done, just redirected. I was an E1 private, still recovering, both physically and mentally. Just weeks earlier, I'd been laid up with a brace strapped to my leg, nursing the slow ache of torn ligaments and the sharper sting of failure. There was no ceremony, no brass band, no high fives or back slaps. That morning, it was just a bus that hissed to a halt, stepping off a sun-faded Bluebird bus, tan, quiet, and unceremonious, into the processing center for the 82nd Airborne Division, where a formation of stone-faced paratroopers stood under a Carolina sky, expressions unreadable, buried beneath the weight of legacy. It was over the next few weeks, as I sat through briefings and classes. I didn't even know my battalion yet when I got my first real education in the 82nd Airborne Division's history. It didn't come from a formation speech or a wall display. It came from a quiet correction. After a particularly asinine statement, just me running my mouth like I already belonged, someone pulled me aside. A staff sergeant. No-nonsense face, squared shoulders, ribbons from Desert Storm stacked high over his heart, and eyes that looked like they'd seen things no briefing slide ever could explain. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just pointed to the right side of my chest and said, "You wear those because someone else died earning them. Make sure they'd be proud of you." That landed like a steel boot to the ribs, hard, true, and it stuck. As I processed into the division, shuffled from one briefing to another, handed gear I was now personally responsible for maintaining, I started to see it all through a different lens. Arrogance and potential might get you through the front gate, but neither earned you a place in this unit. That had to be earned every day. History here wasn't optional, it was briefing material, and it was worn, literally on both sides of the uniform. Unit awards, earned long before I was ever born, were now pinned into my Class A's. Not because I'd earned them, but because I'd been entrusted to carry the weight of their memory, to represent those who had. The sky blue cord on my shoulder marked me as a graduate of the Fort Benning Infantry School. The airborne wings on my chest said I'd passed the basic course which everyone here has done. But the patch on my sleeve, the AA, the ribbons and cord to the right of it, those weren't mine. It was borrowed glory. My job was to elevate my skill set and live up to those honors. I stood there, holding my breath, looking down at the colors of campaigns I had never fought, battles I had never heard, blood I had not spilled, and yet was being entrusted to carry forward. It felt like standing in borrowed boots. Not because they didn't fit, but because they weren't mine yet. I had no business coasting, no excuse for half-effort, no right to breathe the same air as these men if I wasn't ready to match their intensity, their commitment, their sacrifice. Something inside me shifted that day. Not quickly, not with fanfare, but deeply. A quiet recalibration. I stopped thinking about the uniform as something I wore. It became something I answered to. This wasn't about checking boxes. It wasn't about sliding under the radar or making it through inspections without getting smoked. It was about rising, day after day, to the standard that had been set by better men in worse conditions. The patches, the cords, the ribbons, they didn't make me elite. They made me accountable. I was in the company of giants, and from that moment on, I trained like it. This wasn't about getting airborne pay or stacking up badges. It was about living up to men who had died under that same patch. If soldiers had stormed Normandy and held Bastogne, If they had fought in Vietnam, Panama, and Desert Storm under that iconic patch for the 80 Deuce, as it was referred in my day, then I could damn well do my part. This wasn't just a unit. It was a living legacy, stitched in valor, worn on the shoulder, and carried into every fight by those brave or broken enough to wear it. And whether I ever earned my way to Ranger School or walked in the footsteps of the legends sewn into that history, I knew one thing for sure. And from that moment forward, I swore I'd earn every inch of cloth. Void of an emblem. Before the world tore itself open in 1914, before mustard gas and machine guns rewrote the rules of combat, the United States Army was a ghost by comparison of its modern status. A shadow force of isolationists, professional but faceless, modest in size and almost Spartanist in its presentation. No need for flash, no demand for ornament. Its uniform said everything and nothing. Woolen tunics in government-issue brown, campaign hats slung low over eyes that answered to rank, not reputation. The sleeves were blank. Intentionally so. This wasn't an oversight, it was policy, it was doctrine. It didn't take a firefight to reveal the cracks in the old system. Soldiers once spent entire careers inside a single regiment, loyal to colors more familiar than the flag itself. They served captains, not countries. Followed banners, not doctrine. And when the bullets flew, they fought with fierce pride, but only for their own. Elihu Root, Secretary of War in 1899 and a lawyer by trade, saw through the tradition. His mind worked like a field-grade weapon, sharp, deliberate, devastating. Root recognized that regimental pride might win a skirmish, but it couldn't win a modern war. So he cut deep. His reforms didn't massage policy, they broke it down to the studs. He dismantled the practice of lifetime regimental service, severing the old tribal chains. He created a centralized general staff, placing strategy in the hands of professionals, and he laid the cornerstone of future leadership with the Army War College, forging thinkers as well as fighters. These weren't bureaucratic tweaks, they were a scalpel to the Army's soul. Root inherited a patchwork of proud units. He left behind the spine of a unified force. But even Root's doctrine, as rigid as it was revolutionary, couldn't hold its ground forever. Doctrine never survives first contact with a global war, and yet the legacy endured. Today, when a soldier packs his duffel and ships out to a new duty station after 3 years, it's more than routine rotation. It's Root's ghost walking the corridors. A quiet institutional reminder. In the United States Army, no one belongs to a building, a base, or even a battalion. They serve the Army, and the Army serves the people. When Europe ignited and nations mobilized armies the size of American cities, Washington scrambled to build a force that could compete. The call went out. Recruits poured in. Installations like Camp Gordon in Georgia sprang up overnight, cities of mud and canvas, alive with southern humidity and the sound of green soldiers learning how to kill. Among them stood a division unlike any before. The 82nd Infantry Division was a mosaic stitched from every corner of America. Farm boys from Iowa, factory hands out of Ohio, Cajuns from the bayous, Yankees from cold brick cities, Texans with dust still on their boots, and first-generation sons of immigrants still dreaming in broken English. No common region, no shared dialect, nothing to unify them but an oath spoken under the same flag and a roster number barked out at morning roll call. Camp Gordon became the birthplace of their trials. However, a significant issue was revealed. Before there were patches, identification on the battlefield was primitive. Flags, banners, shouted names in the dark. Confusion was inevitable. Men died following the wrong officer. Units split under shell fire. The U.S. Army was about to march into a new kind of Europe, one where machine guns replaced muskets and confusion killed quicker than the enemy. And in that fog, commanders realized something. You couldn't forge unity from geography alone. These men needed more than rations and a rifle. Even the most disciplined soldier needs something to recognize, something to belong to, something to fight for, something like an emblem. This was the Army's last hour in anonymity. The revolutionary Camp Gordon was where it dawned whom it really was. This was the moment before the insignia, before airborne wings, before ranger tabs, before regimental crests, before the patch which became symbols of bloodline and brotherhood, the birthplace of the AA, and the legend it was to become. The dawn of an emblem. But with the patch came clarity, instant, unmistakable, unifying. Camp Gordon didn't just produce soldiers, it gave rise to a symbol that would outlive the war itself. No longer a simple marker of assignment, the insignia was forged into a legacy through acts of raw courage, brutal sacrifice, an unspoken bond, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. What began in obscurity at Camp Gordon rose through Normandy, Sicily, Vietnam, and beyond to global recognition. The solution didn't come down from command. It rose from within the ranks, quietly, without ceremony. A simple idea, born in the barracks and stitched with thread, a red square, a blue circle, and 2 white letters, AA, for All American. What began as a tool for recognition quickly evolved into something far more potent. It was never about decoration. The AA wasn't handed out. It was earned, day after day, in the punishing sun of Georgia drills, in the cold calculus of trench warfare, and later, in places not yet imagined, through clouds of flak over Normandy, in the frozen ruins of Bastogne, the sweltering jungles of Southeast Asia, and the scorched alleys of Fallujah. But back then, it was still just cloth. No fanfare accompanied its birth, no orders were shouted, but every man who wore it understood this was more than a unit patch. It stood for the cost of pulling strangers into brotherhood. It was an answer to chaos, a rally point stitched to the shoulder, a visual bond in a war defined by fragmentation. In the sweltering summer of 1917, as Camp Gordon buzzed with the energy of newly conscripted soldiers preparing for the Great War, recently appointed Brigadier General William P. Burnham to Divisional Command Officer was faced with a unique challenge: to train and mold a diverse assembly of men into a single, cohesive fighting unit. To accomplish this, it would require more than drills and discipline. It demanded a forged identity, something that could bind strangers into brothers and give each man a reason to stand his ground when the bullets started flying. Drawing from his extensive military experience in the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War, he understood the power of symbolism in building esprit de corps. To instill this unity, Burnham initiated a naming contest for the 82nd Division, collaborating with the soldiers under his command, the citizens of Atlanta, and the Atlanta Georgian newspaper. The initiative invited thousands of submissions, reflecting the collective effort to define the division's character. The judging panel, comprising Georgia Governor Hugh Dorsey, Major Roylan E. Beebe, and Burnham himself, among the thousands of entries, one stood out: All-American Division, proposed by Mrs. Vivian Goodwin, a patriotic schoolteacher from Atlanta. Her submission resonated deeply with the division's composition, reflecting the unity of soldiers hailing from every corner of the nation. On April 6, 1918, marking the first anniversary of America's entry into World War I, the name was officially adopted, encapsulating the division's spirit and purpose. By the fall of 1918, divisional command passed to Major General George B. Duncan, a seasoned combat leader with a tactical mind and a deep understanding of morale. He would soon collaborate with Private William B. Price, a meticulous draftsman with an eye for designs, to craft an emblem that reinforced the recently adopted All-American moniker, a name applied to the 82nd just months before Duncan took the reins. Before his military service, Price honed his artistic talents in a civilian drafting office, producing technical blueprints and commercial illustrations. His experience in translating complex ideas into clear visual representations made him an ideal candidate to design a symbol that would encapsulate the division's values of courage, sacrifice, and unity. Price's ability to see beyond mere shapes and into the deeper meaning of symbols allowed him to craft an emblem that would resonate with soldiers from all walks of life. Major General George B. Duncan, a West Point graduate of the class of 1886, carried into Camp Gordon a combat resume forged across 3 decades of American conflict. He had seen the mud and malaria of the Spanish-American War, fought guerrillas in the Philippine jungles, and had already marched through the early bloodletting of the European front with the 26th Infantry Division, the 1st Brigade of the 1st Division, and the 77th Infantry Division. Duncan was no stranger to the complexities of modern war. or to the psychological toll it exacted on his men. He had learned firsthand that unit identity mattered, not as decoration, but as armor for the spirit. It boosted morale when the fighting dragged on, when the letters from home stopped coming, and when the only thing between order and collapse was the symbol on a soldier's sleeve. His leadership during the Moose-Argonne offensive, now at the helm of the newly constructed 82nd Division, reflected a principle Duncan had carried through every campaign: foster cohesion, instill pride, and forge a force that would not just fight, but fight as one. The mission to create the 82nd Division's emblem was anything but straightforward. Designs came and went, dozens of sketches pinned to the wall, each one dismissed for being too ornate, too abstract, or too provincial. None could capture what the division had become: a national force, forged from every state, bound not by geography but by purpose. It was only through the steady collaboration between Private William B. Price, with his draftsman's eye, and Major General George B. Duncan, with his battlefield instinct for morale and cohesion, that the right symbol finally emerged. The result wasn't just aesthetically sharp, it was psychologically potent. It was a banner small enough to stitch onto a sleeve, yet powerful enough to rally a division destined for the unforgiving battlefields of Europe. Duncan didn't treat it like decoration. He understood exactly what it was. The patch is more than cloth. It is the silent voice of commitment, no abstraction. It was chosen with intent. That shade didn't whisper, it declared. It stood for courage and bravery, plain and absolute, the fiery resolve to push forward through chaos, to advance when bullets slice the air, and every instinct screamed to stay down. It symbolizes the soldier committed to duty, willing to give the ultimate sacrifice, not for glory, but in defense of freedom and the brothers who fight beside him. The historical record reveals this long-standing military tradition. Red stands for valor, gallantry under fire, and honor earned in blood. Surrounding the emblem's heart lay a centered circle of deep blue, a nod to loyalty and vigilance. This color was carefully selected to echo the blue field on the American flag, emphasizing fidelity to nation and mission. The blue circle was more than decorative. It was a constant reminder of unity, discipline, and the unyielding watchfulness required to survive in hostile environments. It symbolized the steadfast spirit of the division, binding men together in a shared purpose, unwavering and true. Dominating the emblem were the unmistakable stylized white letters, AA, standing prominently against the backdrop. White, the color of purity and clarity, highlighted the division's core identity: all-American. The letters themselves encapsulated a powerful concept. Soldiers came from every state, every corner of the vast American landscape, forming a single cohesive fighting force. This unifying element, envisioned during the division's creation in World War I, set a precedent for integration and collective strength unmatched in its day. The AA proudly announced to friend and foe alike that this division was a microcosm of American strength, unity, and melting pot. As World War II loomed and military doctrine turned toward the sky, the U.S. Army began embracing a bold new strategy: vertical envelopment, the insertion of troops by air behind enemy lines to disrupt, confuse, and fracture. With that doctrinal leap came a transformation within the 82nd Infantry Division itself. The storied AA patch, a symbol forged in the trenches of the Great War, would not be replaced, it would be crowned. The addition of the Airborne tab, stitched in bold white letters on a field of blue, wasn't mere ornamentation. It was a battlefield proclamation. It preserved the division's sacred lineage, tying to its future in airborne warfare, to honor its achievements earned and sacrificed losses in World War I. But it also signaled a fundamental transformation. These men weren't just infantry anymore. They were jump qualified, parachute deployed, and trained to strike first where the enemy least expected it. The Airborne tab wasn't issued. It was earned, in bone-deep silence at the edge of a jump door, boots hanging out into black sky, heart thudding louder than the C-47's engines. That blue arc above the AA wasn't decoration. It was identification. Not for the public, but for the man next to you, for the one who would be floating somewhere to your left or right in the dead of night, trusting you without question. The tab curved like a blade unsheathed above the red and blue of the 82nd, an emblem already soaked in the sacrifice of the Great War. But now it meant something more. It meant you went in first, before the tanks, before the airfields were secured, before command had a complete map. And when you went, you didn't just go as a soldier, you went as a brother. That arch, in that color, told the world that when these men leapt into the dark, through flak bursts and tracer rounds, into fields they hadn't seen and towns they'd never pronounce, they did so together. Not side by side, but in the same column of wind, scattered across the sky like steel rain, each one knowing beyond doubt that his battle buddy was drifting nearby, locked and loaded, already thinking about which German radio tower or roadblock to demolish first. There was no radio check, no roll call, no time, just a gut feeling and years of drilled trust that said, he's out there too. And when you hit the ground, hard and fast, tangled in chute lines or face down in a French beat field, the only sound more reassuring than your own heartbeat was the low grunt of a fellow paratrooper setting up a perimeter, breathing just as hard, just as ready to raise hell. That's what the Airborne tab represented. It wasn't just a badge, it was a bond. It was the certainty that you were never alone. Not in the jump door, not in the air, not in the fight. The arch above the AA wasn't just marking a new mission set. It was a contract. When that tab sat above the patch, it meant this soldier drops from the sky, lands in chaos, and fights without backup, because he is the backup. And for the enemy, that meant one thing. The 82nd was already behind their lines, already disrupting their comms, blowing up their bridges, and rallying the resistance before dawn had even broken. The patch said where they came from. The tab said how they'd arrive. But only the man wearing both understood why. Because beside him, in the wind, was another soldier just like him, not watching his six, sharing it. The timeless design took on additional layers of meaning, signaling not just unity and bravery, but a resolute commitment to taking risks that others could scarcely imagine. The letters symbolize a revolutionary concept at a time when regional divisions and prejudices still lingered stubbornly within the nation's fabric. Price's vision distilled the diverse spirit of America itself into a clear, powerful image, and Duncan fiercely championed it through the bureaucratic maze of military heraldry. Once refined by the Army's meticulous heraldic section, the responsibility of mass-producing the patch fell to the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps, whose facilities quickly began crafting tens of thousands of patches, and the insignia swiftly began appearing on the uniforms of young soldiers bound for Europe. Immediately, it transformed from mere fabric to sacred emblem. Men marched straighter, eyes hardened with determination, hearts buoyed by pride, as troops departed American shores for the blood-soaked battlefields of Europe, becoming a powerful symbol of American unity and readiness. As the war unfolded, the AA would become synonymous with liberation and courage, recognized instantly by grateful populations from France to Belgium. Soldiers bearing this patch stormed trenches, liberated towns, and etched stories of heroism into history books, each act adding layers of reverence to the insignia. It became an enduring icon, revered not just for victories, but also for the countless lives solemnly honored beneath its vivid threads. As a result to the exceptional skill Private W.B. Price displayed in the initial sketches and Major General George B. Duncan's visionary leadership, birthed more than a military patch. They created a timeless emblem, an enduring banner beneath which generations of soldiers would proudly march, their heads high and spirits united by the silent, unbreakable bond of shared sacrifice and unwavering courage. Guardians of an emblem. The origins of what would become the United States Army Institute of Heraldry date back to the fierce urgency of World War I, a conflict that forever altered military tradition. In the heat of global warfare, the American military recognized an urgent need for distinct visual symbols, identifiable patches and insignias to foster unity, instill pride, and enhance unit cohesion on chaotic battlefields. Though informal at first, the role of heraldry soon became critical, driving the military to formalize and centralize oversight of its visual traditions. By October 19, 1918, the first official shoulder-sleeve insignia, belonging to the 81st Infantry Division nicknamed the Wildcat Division, set a benchmark for military symbolism. Quickly thereafter, the emblematic designs of the 82nd Infantry Division and others followed suit, proving the profound psychological power heraldry could wield. Yet, despite this clear value, heraldic oversight initially remained scattered among various army departments. Through subsequent decades, from the interwar period into the crucible of World War II, the necessity of centralized expert control became undeniable. Emblems, badges, and insignia proliferated, each needing careful design, rigorous symbolic evaluation, and consistent standardization. Recognizing this critical need, the U.S. Army gradually increased its reliance on heraldic specialists, individuals versed not only in military tradition but also deeply knowledgeable in the intricate principles of heraldic symbolism. Finally, during President Dwight D. Eisenhower's administration on September 10, 1960, the United States Army Institute of Heraldry was formally established at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, bringing decades of scattered efforts under one authoritative umbrella. This pivotal move recognized heraldry's central role in reinforcing morale, unity, and identity throughout the Army's ranks. At its core, the Institute was a harmonious blend of precise civilian specialists and seasoned military professionals. These heraldic experts brought historical accuracy, symbolic richness, and aesthetic precision to every emblem under their care. Their duty extended far beyond simple design. Each insignia was subjected to rigorous scrutiny, ensuring it embodied and reinforced the Army's core values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. The Institute of Heraldry's meticulous standards led to some of the military's most revered symbols, including the Combat Infantryman Badge, CIB, Ranger and Special Forces tabs, and the Parachutist Badge. Each emblem transcended mere decoration. It represented a solemn commitment to capability, courage, and readiness. Among these distinguished symbols, the AA insignia of the 82nd Airborne Division stood prominently, revered globally, its legacy shaped by extraordinary bravery and decisive actions across continents. These principles, formalized in the 1990s but rooted deeply in the Army's traditions, are not abstract ideals. They are battle-hardened truths worn into the fabric of the all-American legacy. Loyalty is represented in the blue circle, its color echoing the canton of the American flag, a ring of commitment unbroken. Within the 82nd, loyalty isn't just pledged to the nation, it's fiercely upheld among brothers in arms. Men like Sergeant First Class Randall Shugart, though more famously tied to Delta Force, started his career in the 82nd Airborne. His loyalty to fellow soldiers was unquestionable, evident during the Battle of Mogadishu, his sacrifice which posthumously earned him the Medal of Honor. Duty lives in the Red Square, the field of fire where tasks are not optional, and responsibility weighs heavier than the rucksack. When paratroopers from the 82nd were the first to deploy during Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada in 1983, it wasn't a glamorous mission, but it was necessary, and they performed without hesitation. Respect runs through the threads holding the patch together. It's seen in the way NCOs mold the next generation, in how seasoned jump masters check rookie static lines without ridicule. The 82nd's culture demands it, rewards it, and enforces it. Selfless service is the soul of the White AA, a reminder that these men came from all over the United States, not for personal gain but for collective defense. Captain Humbert Rocky Versace, who served with the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd, his direct actions of protecting fellow service members led him to posthumously earning the Medal of Honor. Honor is the patch itself, a reputation worn and earned. The 82nd has never sought glory, but it has accrued it through relentless excellence. From Normandy to Kandahar, the patch has represented soldiers who hold themselves to a higher standard. Integrity is invisible, but ever present. It's in the small actions, paratroopers checking gear twice, speaking the truth to command, or refusing shortcuts during tough missions. Integrity is what ensures the patch continues to mean what it always has. Personal courage is the air under every parachute, the charge across every open field, the quiet walk into the unknown. It's what Corporal Alvin York embodied in the Argonne Forest in 1918, before the 82nd ever took to the skies, an act of staggering bravery that defined the division's legacy. When units sought to create or update their symbols, they brought detailed proposals, complete with sketches, historical context, and symbolic explanations, to the Institute. Every submission underwent thorough evaluation by panels of civilian heraldists and senior military officers. This meticulous, uncompromising process ensured the final designs were distinct, historically resonant, and visually powerful. The guardians at the Institute understood the profound power of heraldic symbols held to inspire troops and unite diverse soldiers beneath a common banner. The emblems created here communicated without words, echoing through barracks, resonating on battlefields, and elevating parade grounds. Soldiers wore these symbols proudly, recognizing them not merely as badges of affiliation, but as profound representations of sacrifice, service, and courage. Internationally, allies and adversaries alike quickly learned the significance behind each carefully crafted emblem. Indeed, the Institute's relentless dedication guaranteed that each patch, badge, and emblem carried forward both historical significance and the sacrifices made by generations of American soldiers. Far beyond simple identifiers, these symbols stood as enduring reminders of duty fulfilled, honor upheld, and courage proven time and again. The All-American patch, stitched with these values, has become more than a uniform detail. It is a contract, a code, a promise. When foreign troops see it, they recognize not just the might of the American military, but the moral compass that guides it. From Italian partisans in World War II to NATO allies in Kabul, the presence of the patch assures them these soldiers will fight hard, stand firm, and do the right thing. Nowhere was this reputation more clearly demonstrated than in Haiti, on the brink of conflict in September 1994. As the 82nd Airborne Division's DRF-1, Division Ready Force 1, was staged and airborne, with the 2nd Battalion, 325th Airborne Infantry Regiment en route to the island, diplomacy teetered on a knife's edge. General Raul Cedras, who had clung to power despite democratic elections, had resisted all calls to step aside. But the tide shifted not with the firing of a shot, but with the sight of paratroopers. Presented with a video feed showing aircraft being loaded with 82nd Airborne paratroopers, General Cedras was informed, while he still processed what he believed was live surveillance, that the footage was already hours old. The lead elements of the division were, by then, already in the air over the Atlantic. The message was unmistakable. The patch was coming. And with it, a history of swift, overwhelming precision from Panama to Grenada. But this wasn't merely psychological warfare. This was visual deterrence executed with the weight of generations. The loading of aircraft, the airborne departure, and the paratroopers' unmistakable silhouettes were not merely tactical maneuvers, they were theater. Precision choreography backed by historic resolve. It was a warning in motion. The 82nd didn't just posture, it committed. And the world had seen what followed when the 82nd committed. Within minutes, Cedras capitulated. The conflict that could have escalated into bloodshed resolved instead with strategic intimidation anchored by a patch. No shots fired, no boots hit the ground. Yet a nation changed course. Such is the power of the All-American insignia. Not merely a symbol, it is a force multiplier, a warning and a reassurance, depending on where one stands. To enemies, it is the sign of inevitable consequences. To the oppressed, it is the herald of hope. And to the soldiers who wear it, it is the solemn legacy of those who came before, and the living oath to do what is right when the world is watching. Emblem eternal, family traditions. In the quiet glow of a setting sun, where the golden hues of tradition meet the steadfast lines of duty, the story of America's military service unfolds, a narrative painted with the delicate brushstrokes of commitment, sacrifice, and familial legacy. In a nation of roughly 340 million, the all-volunteer force draws from a razor-thin slice of the population. Less than 1% serve. That's approximately 3.4 million Americans in uniform per generation. But even that number doesn't tell the whole story. Not when you drill down into the data that really matters. Of those who raise their right hand and swear to defend the Constitution, nearly 79% report having a family member who served before them. That means roughly 2.7 million out of every 3.4 million service members didn't arrive by accident. They arrived by legacy. The most revealing figure is that 30% of those don't just come from military families. They follow in lockstep, choosing to serve in the same branch or unit as a parent. That's over 805,800 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines mirroring the exact path of their mother or father. Same shoulder patch, same creed, same ground. To put it plainly, in an Army brigade of 4,000, nearly 3,160 of them will have military bloodlines, and 960 will be walking in the literal boot prints of a parent. Units like the 1st Infantry Division, the 101st Airborne, and the 82nd Airborne aren't just names etched in history. They're living institutions, sustained by the pedigree which refuses to break. This lineage of service is not merely a statistic, but a living heritage, where the echoes of past commitments resonate in the choices of the present. In families where military service is a cherished tradition, these patches become heirlooms, passed down with stories of valor and resilience. For families like the Huffmans, the patch isn't just fabric, it's a bloodline. It represents more than affiliation. It's a declaration passed from generation to generation, worn into combat, folded into sea bags, and sewn into memory. Over 3 generations, the Huffman name has been etched into the operational rhythm of the 130th Airlift Wing of the West Virginia Air National Guard, not as a fluke, but as a living, breathing lineage of service. Their connection to the unit runs deeper than personnel records or deployment logs. It's in the language they speak at the dinner table, in the call signs muttered with pride, in the silent pause before the national anthem plays. When a Huffman dons that winged insignia, they aren't just wearing the current standard, they're walking in the bootsteps of their own blood. Same hangar, same flight line, same oath, passed like a torch from one hand to the next. The younger Huffmans didn't just follow a career path, they followed the same patch. That specific emblem, the 130th's Flying Hercules symbol, became the gravitational center of the family's service. It wasn't just about joining the military, it was about returning to something sacred, rejoining a tradition, reinforcing a blood pact etched not on paper, but on camouflage and flak vests. This isn't nostalgia, it's operational culture. When you grow up hearing mission briefings in real time, watching TDY departures from the other side of the fence line, and seeing your last name stitched over chest pockets lined up in a row of uniforms hanging at the front door, it's only a matter of time before the patch becomes more than emblematic. It becomes inevitable. And with that inevitability comes responsibility, to uphold the standard, to carry the name, not just the family name, but the units. Because in families like the Huffmans, the patch doesn't represent one soldier's journey. It represents a family's unbroken commitment to serve. Some legacies are written in ink. Others are carved into headstones, tucked inside field orders, and sewn into the uniforms of 4 generations. The Ugarte family didn't stumble into service, they built their lives around it. From the smoking ruins of World War II to the IED-riddled convoys of the 21st century, the Ugartes have worn the uniform like a second skin, each generation stepping forward as the last stepped back. It started with a rifleman in the European theater, an Ugarte grandfather who fought his way across France with the quiet resolve of a man who understood that history isn't something you witness, it's something you earn. He came home with ribbons, a limp, and a sense that his children would one day stand where he had, and they did. The second generation traded M1 Garands for M16s and ponchos for Kevlar, pushing through Vietnam's jungle rot and the cold calculus of Cold War-era operations. No ceremony, no spotlight, just orders, grit, and the unspoken family expectation. When the nation calls, you answer. By the third, the battlefield had changed, but the bloodline hadn't. Desert Storm, Iraq. The Ugartes were still in the fight. This time, one son served as an officer, the other as an enlisted man, both wearing the same name tape, both understanding that rank meant nothing in the face of tradition. In forward operating bases half a world away from where their grandfather had fought, they found themselves carrying his war stories like doctrine, part mythology, part marching orders. Now a 4th generation carries the weight. Digital camouflage, modular plate carriers, and biometric security checkpoints have replaced the sandbags and MREs of the past. But the oath, the discipline, the why remains the same, A family doesn't survive 4 generations in the army without sacrifice. Missed birthdays, empty chairs at holidays, folded flags. And yet the Ugartes never wavered. They don't wear the uniform because they have to. They wear it because that's what Ugartes do. Their legacy isn't a chapter in a history book. It's an active file, still growing, still marching forward. In an army where fewer and fewer families carry the torch, the Ugartes stand out not for their medals, but for their consistency. For proving again and again that duty doesn't dilute across generations, it deepens. And somewhere in the pages of the Army's personnel files, 4 generations of the same bloodline serve as a case study in American resilience. Not as a footnote, but as a standard. Remarkably, the Thomas family exemplifies this tradition. Spanning 5 continual generations, their service in various Army units underscores a deep familial commitment to military duty. From World War I to recent deployments, each generation of the Thomas family has participated in combat, illustrating the enduring nature of military commitment within families. The emblems worn by these service members are more than mere patches. They are symbols of enduring values and shared histories. Each insignia, meticulously crafted and rigorously tested, embodies the spirit of the unit it represents. The process of bringing these symbols to life is as precise as it is reverent, ensuring that every color, thread, and design element stands as a beacon of the unit's identity and the soldier's pledge. They are worn with pride by new generations, each stitching a connection to ancestors who once stood in the same ranks, faced similar challenges, and upheld the same values. As the sun sets on one day and rises on the next, the legacy of service continues, illuminated by the unwavering commitment of those who choose to serve. In the gentle light of remembrance and honor, the story of America's military families is painted, a masterpiece of dedication, unity, and enduring pride. In an age where satellites can read the serial number off a rifle bolt from low Earth orbit, and drone swarms can engage targets without a single boot on the ground, it might seem strange that a few square inches of cloth still matter. But they do, more than ever. As battlefield technology evolves, so too does the humble unit insignia, not in principle, but in construction. These aren't the patches of your grandfather's army. Today's shoulder sleeve insignia are the result of meticulous engineering, designed not just to represent, but to endure. High-tensile polyester threads now replace the cotton twill of the past, offering resilience against heat, friction, and the corrosive filth of modern deployment environments. Whether that's the red dust of Helmand, the Arctic cold of Alaska, or the monsoon-soaked jungles of the Pacific. But the real leap came with infrared compliance. After operational lessons learned the hard way in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Army adopted patches woven with threads that reflect IR light only under specific wavelengths, visible to friendly night vision optics, but ghosted to enemy sensors. This advancement gave infantry units the ability to maintain unit identity without becoming walking bullseyes in the dark. Identification without compromise. Symbolism with stealth. Every color still adheres to the Federal Standard 595, right down to the dye lot. Every inch is battlefield tested for abrasion resistance, sweat saturation, flame exposure, and UV fading. The average civilian might look at a patch and see a novelty, but the soldier knows better. That patch has already survived trials more brutal than some weapons platforms. And while the tech has changed, the meaning hasn't. Unit insignia are not just textile, they're time machines, a link between the past and present. A fresh recruit's patch is the same design worn by men who held the line at Bastogne, who jumped into Normandy at midnight, who slogged through Khe Sanh and patrolled Kandahar's burning roads. Each one connects the living to the fallen and the future to the legacy. It's not an accessory, it's a burden, a badge, a promise. For families with generations in uniform, patches become heirlooms, preserved not in glass cases, but in folded flags and old duffel bags, worn by sons where fathers once bled, stitched anew on shoulders that remember. They speak a language that transcends rank and MOS, one of honor, one of sacrifice, one of duty. And that's why no algorithm, no autonomous system, no drone strike will ever replace it. Because while war evolves, the spirit of the soldier and the symbol he wears over his heart remains unmoved. Decades after the guns fell silent, Major General James Gavin stood as both legend and witness. He didn't speak often of sentiment, but when he did, it cut deep. That patch, he said, eyes fixed on the AA, does not belong to any one soldier. It belongs to history itself, bearing witness to the courage, unity, and sacrifice of thousands. He wasn't exaggerating. Across the killing fields of Europe, from the smoke-choked ruins of St. Mère-Église to the frozen hellscape of Bastogne, the AA wasn't just recognized, it was revered. Civilians emerged from cellars and shattered storefronts not just to greet Americans, but to greet that patch. It came to symbolize liberation, resolve, and the ironclad promise that the All-Americans were near. In village after village, the insignia was burned into memory as the advance guard of freedom itself. The man who carried it, Gavin, the youngest division commander in World War II, became indistinguishable from the patch. His legend, earned in the chaos of airborne drops and street-to-street combat, reinforced what the insignia already stood for. But it wasn't just his legacy. It belonged to every man who fought beneath it. Every drop zone, every trench, every charge forward when retreat seemed easier. And that weight didn't vanish with time. It transferred from one generation to the next. Families like the Gavins and Taylors didn't just produce soldiers. They built bloodlines around service. From World War II's battlegrounds to the counterinsurgency operations of Iraq and Afghanistan, these families didn't watch history unfold. They participated, again and again, in the same uniforms, under the same flags, bearing the same insignia. The names change, the terrain changes, but the patches remain. And they aren't chosen by accident. Modern descendants don't stumble into these divisions. They seek them out. They request the same units their parents and grandparents once fought in, not out of nostalgia, but because that's where the legacy lives. In the 82nd Airborne, the 101st Airborne, and the 1st Infantry Division, the numbers bear it out. These storied commands record some of the highest rates of multi-generational enlistment in the entire U.S. military. The sons and daughters of warfighters return not just to serve, but to honor, to carry forward the mission, to earn the right to wear the same insignia that led men through Normandy, Saigon, Fallujah. Indeed, veterans like Command Sergeant Major Kenneth Rock Merritt, who jumped into Normandy in 1944 and subsequently served through Korea and Vietnam, perfectly encapsulate this sentiment. Merritt often highlighted the enduring power of the insignia, remarking proudly, "That right there, that tells them who we are before we say a word." Today's soldiers, deploying from C-17s into hostile terrain or engaging as peacekeepers in tense global regions, carry forward this honored tradition. The insignia they wear, meticulously crafted, historically significant, and universally respected, transcends mere fabric. Allies recognize it immediately, civilians remember it fondly, and adversaries respect it deeply. For these soldiers, especially those whose service echoes through generations, each patch represents an unspoken oath, binding their courage and resolve to the storied legacies of their ancestors.